Welcome to Screen Blast Repeat. Today we review one of the most important discographies of the last 40 years. We're talking about the legendary industrial rock unit Nine Inch Nails, led for most of their time by the single vision of multi-instrumentalist Trent Reznor. In this video we'll delve into their catalogue to appraise their output and establish which albums have stood the test of time, which ones have fallen out of people's consciousness, and which ones are unremarkable. Like The Cure and Depeche Mode, Nine Inch Nails have established a throne in goth culture without being a goth band. They brought industrial music into the mainstream without being an industrial artist. Many metalheads expanded their horizons beyond loud guitars thanks to Trent Reznor's experiments with chugging riffs and bubbling synths, yet they're not a metal group despite winning a Grammy for Best Metal Performance in 1992. Indeed, they spearheaded the alternative music movement of the 1990s and coexisted with grunge and rap metal as easily as France and Luxembourg, yet Nine Inch Nails are a genre unto themselves. Coming out of the 1980s with a warped idea of blending synth music and pop structures, Trent Reznor built up his following through angst-ridden anthems and grueling tours at the dawn of Lollapalooza. By the time he moved into heavier guitar-led music in 1992, the landscape had moved with him. You could argue that he was the most important artist in alternative music in the period 1994 to 2005, after the critical and commercial success of 1994's The Downward Spiral. An enemy of the music business that benefited from his special connection with the dark subcultures and alienated youth hiding in plain sight before Nirvana's Nevermind, Trent went out of his way to antagonize the suits and rip up the rulebook. People bought his music in droves despite him showing no interest in writing catchy songs for most of the 1990s. How many major label artists would be allowed to follow a triple platinum record like The Downward Spiral with a double album like The Fragile? The first decade of the 21st century saw Trent cement a place in pop culture as an uncompromising artist with insurgent power in the industry. 2005's With Teeth album landed him his second #1 on the Billboard charts before he foresaw the disruption of the corporate musical landscape and released 2008's album The Slip under a Creative Commons license. Since then, the Pennsylvania native has ventured into film scores, won Golden Globes and Academy Awards, and continued to produce Nine Inch Nails music, including a brief contractual relationship with Columbia Records for 2013's Hesitation Marks album. For this discography review, we'll exclude official live recordings. The same goes for remix albums. Fixed, Further Down the Spiral, Things Falling Apart, and Year Zero Remixed are nothing but major label cash grabs and have little artistic merit. Likewise, the 3 instrumental records, Ghosts 1 to 4, Ghost 5 Together, and Ghost 6 Locusts, are beyond the reach of this reviewer and are so left field that they take the Nine Inch Nails catalogue in a direction that's not representative of their core sound. Including these is like asking a reviewer of novels to give an appraisal of a poetry anthology. There's a common consensus as to which are the untouchable Nine Inch Nails records and which ones are open to more criticism. We'll try to be as objective as possible and avoid sycophancy, but that's almost impossible with albums like Pretty Hate Machine and The Downward Spiral, both of which deserve their adoration. This is the Screen Blast Repeat Guide to Nine Inch Nails. So we start with the debut Nine Inch Nails record from 1989, Pretty Hate Machine, released via TVT Records. How many superlatives can we use to describe the genius of the debut Nine Inch Nails record? Perhaps a better description is the most aggressive synth-pop album ever released. Aside from Depeche Mode's Black Celebration, it might also be the darkest. Before Kurt Cobain awakened the angst of teenagers and 20-somethings, you had Robert Smith of The Cure and Morrissey of The Smiths. In between them, you had a young Trent Reznor. There's a vulnerability and restlessness to this album. Pretty Hate Machine is gorgeous in its naivety and scary in its deliberations. Fueled by rage at the corporate institutions dominating America, confused by the difficulty of holding down relationships, fascinated by the darker side of human desire, strung out by the pain of lovesickness, this is the real deal. Almost every song has a fist-clenching verse or chorus and a memorable stanza that makes you take a step back and say, did I just sing along with that? Head Like a Hole and Sin show the likes of Skinny Puppy and Ministry how to craft orthodox songs out of unsentimental soundscapes and skull-crushing beats. Terrible Lie rages against God in a squelching synth and bass attack. Down in It uses breakbeats and rap vocals to articulate despair. But then there's also the unsettling piano ballad, Something I Can Never Have, where even Trent says in the lyrics, "I'm starting to scare myself." For most of this album, bass lines slap and pop underneath loud kick drums and minimalist keyboard atmospherics. Vocal rhythms threaten to crack in self-destructive rage. Listen to Trent ad-lib his vocal lines in a wonderful anguish of melody at the end of Ring Finger. He abandoned the quirky synths in favour of heavy guitars in the next decade, but this is where it all began. The alienated youth of Generation X didn't know it at the time, but their spokesman arrived onto the scene in 1989. Verdict? 9 out of 10. Next up is Nine Inch Nails' debut EP and major label outing, Broken, released in 1992 via Interscope Records. Those of you familiar with Scream Blast Repeat will know that we've already christened the 1992 Nine Inch Nails record the greatest EP of all time in a previous video. There is nothing that can rival this record's vitality, creativity and originality. Trent did a hell of a job tapping into the zeitgeist despite going out of his way to be as uncommercial as possible after breaking free from TVT Records. Broken is a radical departure from Pretty Hate Machine and a clear leap into industrial metal. Drop D guitars and thick distorted riffs beef up the Nine Inch Nails rhythms like an injection of steroids. Now, Trent is the sadomasochistic psychopath with a newfound aggression. He uses the synth presets sparingly, replacing the Human League with Helmet and OMD with Ministry. The anthemic words are even more engaging. "I'm the one without a soul, I'm the one with this big fucking hole," he screams in Wish. The half-timing chorus and ringing power chords will make you want to open your lungs and shout into the sky. By contrast, the crunchy guitars in Last will give you an incentive to bring out the air guitar and swing your head. Every industrial metal band of the 1990s would pay attention to the body-smashing grooves on show here. This EP's magic lies in its determination to treat the listener like an album consumer. The eerie instrumental minimalism of Help Me I'm in Hell works perfectly as a transition to the industrial power electronics of Happiness in Slavery, which somehow rescues a catchy bridge and remorseful chorus from the chaos. Synths froth and pop in the background as guitars palm-mute their chords with metallic force. The rapid audio assault of Gave Up is merciless in its fury and self-hatred. This is the record that introduced Nine Inch Nails to the heavy metal crowd and convinced the grunge acolytes that you could write a raw and heavy form of music with electronics as well as guitars. Verdict? 10 out of 10. We now turn our attention to the Nine Inch Nails' sophomore album, The Downward Spiral, released in 1994 via Interscope Records. All great artists have a masterpiece. The Nine Inch Nails' Pièce de Résistance arrived in 1994 with no discernible radio hits and no desire to play by the rules of the music industry. Recorded in the former LA mansion where the Manson family cult murdered Sharon Tate, the record follows one man's descent into insanity and suicidal contemplation and touches upon themes of addiction, disease and self-destruction. The music is dissonant and violent, yet spacious and comfortable in rare moments of solitude. Reznor continues with the chunky guitars but brings back the synths from Pretty Hate Machine and continues the mood of alienation and despair. Songs like Mr. Self-Destruct, March of the Pigs and I Do Not Want This throb with murderous rage. Other cuts like Piggy and A Warm Place find shelter in a blissful respite from the misanthropic torment. Reznor takes us on a 65-minute journey through a self-imposed hell. It's grim but relatable as testified by the triple platinum sales that this album achieved. Yet there is so much that's groundbreaking here. Who can forget the dark synth-funk thrill of Closer with its disturbing erotic imagery and savage chorus line of I want to fuck you like an animal? What about the complex offbeat rhythms and squelchy bass of The Becoming, or the crushing industrial doom of Reptile? As experimental as a Coil LP and sometimes as heavy as a Pantera Reckoning, the dynamic range and unorthodox arrangements make The Downward Spiral a landmark album. We didn't need Johnny Cash to remind us that the vocal lines in Hurt are the most poignant of the decade, but he did a great job ramming home the message for those on the outside 10 years later. This album is the most important record of the 1990s in alternative music. You could call it the definitive industrial LP and the most imaginative heavy guitar opus of its era. or perhaps just the darkest studio recording in the post-Kurt Cobain epoch. Whichever way you look at it, this is a bona fide classic. Verdict? 10 out of 10. Let's fast forward 5 years to the one and only double album in the Nine Inch Nails catalogue, and of course we're talking about 1999's The Fragile, released via Interscope Records. Following up on a record that achieves commercial and critical success is always difficult. Producing an album to follow the downward spiral is even harder. After the widespread acclaim and grueling tours that went with it, Trent fell further into depression, drink, and drugs. He knew that the pressure would be immense from the label executives. The critics, the public, and the fan base would be just as demanding. Everybody wanted a piece of Nine Inch Nails. Yet he didn't want to write the musical version of the Downward Spiral Part 2, even if the lyrical themes and headspace would be a continuation of the predecessor record. The Fragile is an ambitious double album that retains the industrial metal distortion and yet moves away from it and into the realms of progressive rock, ambient soundscapes, and electronica. Many of the songs are instrumental compositions. Some of them are fierce rock scuffles with underdog chorus celebrations. Pianos often replace synths in moments of mournful introspection. Opener, Somewhat Damaged, is a hysterical car crusher that reveals its layers like a peacock, widening its tail feathers. The angry anthems of Disc 1, We're in This Together and No You Don't, rear their heads among progressive canvases like La Mer and The Great Below. Listen how the maudlin piano of The Frail segues into the agitated industrial angst of The Wretched. The attention to detail is simply remarkable. The main criticism of this record is the drop-off in quality on Disc 2. It's true that Where Is Everybody and Please get to the finishing line on crutches despite their rich tapestry. You can detect an unwelcome intrusion of writer's block in the way Trent struggles to finish the textured techno-prog of Complications. Likewise, the awesome potential of The Way Out Is Through never receives the expansion that its intro and build-up deserve. But the classics of this too are hard to ignore. Into the Void and Star Fockers Inc. are strong singles. The Big Come Down is a brooding piece of art rock with funky guitars, squelch bass notes, and muscular vocals that navigate their way to a wonderful melodic chorus. If Ripe with Decay isn't cinematic post-rock, what the hell is? The most anticipated album of 1999 in the entire music industry, The Fragile was always going to be up against impossible expectations. But listen to it 25 years later, and you'll still discover things that were not there before. Verdict? 8 out of 10. Next, we move on to album number 4 in the Nine Inch Nails catalogue, and we're talking about With Teeth, released in 2005 via Interscope Records. Trent composed his 2005 album in a sober state of mind for the first time since his 1989 debut. Much had changed in the years after the tour for The Fragile wrapped up. Nu metal had peaked and burned out, tame indie rock was in the ascendancy, ironic synth-pop showed signs of a resurgence. The geopolitical landscape was also much more fractured in the post-9/11 age. Trent settled on George W. Bush as the nemesis of the era, yet the introverted themes on With Teeth had more to do with his recovery from addiction than a snarling critique of the times. You could argue that With Teeth is the nearest thing to a conventional rock album in the Nine Inch Nails discography. Growling bass lines and fuzzy guitars buzz through the mix like the toolkit of a master blacksmith. Dave Grohl's pounding drum performances amplify the intensity. The songs set aside as singles are more obvious. The Hand That Feeds, Every Day Is Exactly the Same, Only. All three are powerful yet quite conventional. You need to look deeper to appreciate the skill and sophistication of this record. Opener, All the Love in the World, is a predatory massive attack introversion that Trent ought to have explored more than once here to keep things fresh. The problems that beset Disc 2 of The Fragile are in full view on The Collector and Love Is Not Enough, which harvest some mean bass riffs and spirited vocals but have no imagination beyond a verse-chorus structure. Thankfully, the angular noise ritual of the title track and the belting self-reflection of The Line Begins to Blur save this album from mediocrity. Examining the songs in isolation reveals some festering shortcomings. Listening to them as a collective whole presents no such problems. Verdict? 7 out of 10. Okay, let's fast forward 2 years to 2007 for the Nine Inch Nails album Year Zero, released via Interscope Records. Sobriety brought a new productivity to Trent Reznor's songwriting. We used to wait 5 years between albums, now he reduced it by half. Year Zero is the record Nine Inch Nails should have made as a successor to The Fragile, and Trent did not want to squander his antipathy for George W. Bush and neoconservatism. Yet he didn't want to write simple protest music, so he came up with a concept record about a dystopian USA of the future, governed by a theocratic regime, or we might call it a society built on guns and Bibles. At 63 minutes in length and awash with crumbling machine noises and bleeping computer frequencies, Year Zero feels like a clean slate. Out goes the electronic garage rock after track 2, in come the laptop electronics. You can feel Trent's reinvigoration as a creative artist here. Listen how the playful but sorrowful funk of The Good Soldier transitions into the laser synth splatter of Vessel. Go ahead and tap your foot to the retro pop beats of Capital G while lamenting the fate of the little man who succumbs to the heel of authoritarian government. Somehow it feels good to follow the protagonist into a remorseless world of murder and survivalism. Somehow, you just can't stop listening to it. See if the chorus to Meet Your Master lets you do anything other than flex your biceps and stand tall. Your humanity is not quite extinguished. Regrets linger in the mighty electronic rock of The Great Destroyer as the protagonist ponders over the things his government asks him to do in the name of patriotism. A gargantua wall of noise and squirming power tool effects, it's not always possible for Trent to add illustrative vocal lines to these compositions, but he does a great job on God-Given and the poignant closing track Zero Sum. This is the last great album in the Nine Inch Nails canon. Verdict? 8 out of 10. Let's move on a year and look at The Slip, an album that was a digital-only release at first via a Creative Commons license and then released in physical format by the Null Corporation in 2008. Trent's momentum and creative juices showed no sign of abating after rediscovering his zest on Year Zero. Starting 2008 with the daydreaming instrumental album Ghosts 1-4, he surprised fans with another full-length only 3 months later when The Slip appeared as a digital release on the Nine Inch Nails website under a Creative Commons license. Now severed from Interscope Records, Trent approached this studio offering with a new mindset: record an album of garage electronics in the shortest time possible. It took him 3 weeks. You can hear the catchy hooks, anxious chorus remonstrations, and mischievous drum beats of the classic period in the 1990s throughout most of The Slip. Trent's idea of rock is a noisy affair with ugly guitar tones searching for melody in a wall of distortion. Fuzz bass and anxious vocal projections integrate to great effect in 1 Million. Likewise, frantic beats and power driver guitars fight with a static producing bass line in Letting You, as Trent sings with a sharp intake of breath before each line. But the standout track is the album's sole single, Discipline. Is this a sequel to Only? If anything, it's superior to the more famous single from 2005. Here, Trent's voice dominates the mix in all its masculine fragility. Listen to the rolling bass grooves and danceable hi-hat maneuvers. It's also Trent's last great vocal line that you can hum in your head. The album loses a bit of momentum in the last third with an over-reliance on edgy instrumentals for the music tech boffins. Let's be honest, 7 minutes is a tad excessive for the atonal sound design ambience of Corona Radiata, which only comes to life after 5 minutes. But the stripped-down piano introspection of Nine Inch Nails shows itself to be as poignant as ever in Lights in the Sky, and Trent shows on Echoplex that he can translate his words into melodies as if it's 1989 again. Here, an Ultravox drum machine sound receives a post-punk bassline with plectrums scraping the strings like rakes through dried leaves. The Slip could well be the most underrated album in the band's discography. Verdict? 7 out of 10. We now move forward another 5 years to 2013 for the one and only album Nine Inch Nails released via Columbia Records, and that album is Hesitation Marks. Trent reverted to his normal 5-year gap between albums after the creative burst of Year Zero and The Slip. In that time, he ventured into film scores with Atticus Ross and landed a Golden Globe and an Academy Award for his soundtrack to 2010's The Social Network. He also did the unimaginable as the music world's most famous loner in 2009 by marrying Mary Queen Mondig and starting a family. Together they created a side project called How to Destroy Angels. So the person who returned under the Nine Inch Nails name in 2013 had a different worldview, different priorities, and less to be angry about as a 48-year-old man. Despite this, Hesitation Marks hovers in the same dark space as previous records. Guitars are sparse, rumbling electro bass patterns dominate. The synth arpeggiator button receives more attention as Trent's piano motifs saunter in the background like unfinished eulogies. Copy Over and Came Back Haunted sway among unmelodious groove frameworks and come to life in the trademark anxiety of their creator. Listen how he gets intimate with the microphone in the chorus to all-time low as a choppy synth rotation clears the way in the bridge. The levels of rage synonymous with Nine Inch Nails is noticeable by its absence here, but that does not hold back this album. If anything, it's the running time of 61 minutes that turns this into a chore near the end. Yet fans will find a lot to engage with on Hesitation Marks. There is so much to dig into, and so little of it is abstract and unremarkable like the interlude tracks on the Ghost series of albums. The hand claps and hip shaking rhythms of Satellite are as catchy as anything you'll hear in a monotone whisper. Your ears might need counselling after the power pop surge of noise in everything, but it's a risk that deserves respect. Various methods of escape also shows that Trent still has the talent to mix programmed drums with a ruminating rock chorus. Though not in the same league as the Downward Spiral or the Fragile, Hesitation Marks is a worthy addition to the Nine Inch Nails repertoire with as many surprises as treats for the faithful. Verdict? 7 out of 10. We now move to 2016 for the first EP in a trilogy of releases, and we're talking about Not the Actual Events, released via the Null Corporation. After scoring the soundtracks to Before the Flood and Patriots Day, Trent Reznor returned with the first original material since 2013 and announced the full-time membership of long-term collaborator Atticus Ross. The first in a trilogy of records, this EP is the weakest one in the Nine Inch Nails discography. Some people praise Not the Actual Events for returning to the industrial metal sound of the 1990s, but what record were they listening to? The vocal lines in Branches Bones are straight from With Teeth, the chorus a rip-off of Getting Smaller but with an annoying inflection of the last word. Dear World starts well enough with exciting high-register synth loops, whispered voice and a busy drum beat. Trent shows here that he can still create a soundscape with electronics, but where is the chorus? Underwhelming is the kindest thing we can say about this EP. Most of it sounds like leftover material from Year Zero. The offbeat staccato rock and menacing bass tones of The Idea of You offer some interesting contrast with discordant piano intervals, but Trent whispers the opening verses for want of anything more imaginative. The chorus is a simple yell you'd expect from a garage rock band. Has Trent forgotten how to sing? Is the idea of a sing-along anthem now anathema to him? The unpredictability of the song arrangements and sophistication of production will leave you returning to Not the Actual Events on the odd occasion to see if you can make sense of it with the passing of time, but you'll need tremendous reserves of goodwill to see it in a new light after 8 years. Verdict? 5 out of 10. Let's move on to the second of the trilogy of releases that came out via the Null Corporation, and this time we're going to be analysing the 2017 EP, Add Violence. Trent and Atticus remembered some of the features that made Nine Inch Nails great on the second installment in their trilogy of releases. Add Violence doesn't quite shake the tired garage rock electronics of its predecessor, but its opening track is a step up in quality. A dark disco affair with charming funk beats and glittering synths spearheading Trent's sultry voice approach, Less Than contains memorable vocal phrasing and a clear bridge and chorus. The grungy guitars only add to the body-popping thrill. Likewise, the somber sprinkle of piano over an introspective bass and drum combination in This Isn't the Place create a sense of place the way a novelist does. This could be a Disc 2 inclusion on the Fragile, with Trent's fragile falsetto cracking intrepid despair. You might even call it an atmospheric sequel to Piggy. A few flaws remain from Not the Actual Events. The excessive use of a whispering vocal style in The Lovers suggests that Trent could find no inspiration to articulate his lyrics. This feels like a Year Zero outtake. It searches for a gradual path to a climactic event but goes nowhere. Musically, Not Anymore is what it feels like to be trapped in a mud hut that you're free to leave at any time. The steaming bass and cautious drums of the verse parts find their true voice in the distortion of the chorus. It's fascinating, but it wouldn't make the cut for any of the first 3 albums. Nevertheless, ending the record with the 12 minutes of the background world is a risk that pays off here. The last 8 minutes of distortion and sabotage are thrilling to watch after the opening quarter of slimy synth bass grooves and vocal arrangements from the Hesitation Marks era. The attention to ambient detail from Atticus Ross is impressive. Listen how Trent hangs his head over the mic stand like a marathon runner who stops for breath after crossing the finishing line. The stakes are not as high, but you could call this a return to form. Verdict? 7 out of 10. We now move to the final piece in the trilogy, to 2018 and the album Bad Witch, released by the Null Corporation. This is the shortest album in the Nine Inch Nails discography with a running time of 30 minutes, and it feels like an EP. The weaknesses that plagued Not the Actual Event slip back in here. Opener shit mirrors more tried and tested electro garage punk with a handclap snare and angry vocals. Ahead of Ourselves is what you get if you ask The Prodigy to remix one of your songs. In fact, it sounds like Trent asked them to remix The Collector from 2005, as the vocal lines are near identical in the verse parts. Abrasive guitars in the chorus do little to enhance this song. Would it get any attention if this was a new band and not the mighty Nine Inch Nails? Fortunately, things improve after the first 2 cuts thanks to Trent's long-awaited introduction of the saxophone into his music. Play the Goddamn Part is the best composition on the album. Listen to the saxophone notes crawl out of the morass of eerie noise sequences like rats from a New Orleans drain. Finally, we have something new and exciting and disdainful of boundaries. Listen how the cautious brass notes and squirming synths unite in a body-popping drum and bass beating God Break Down the Door. The swirling sonics threaten to warp your brain like a menacing QR code scanner that wants to put you on a factory setting. Hesitation Marks would have benefited from a track like this. So why didn't Trent and Atticus make this new sound the centerpiece of the album? Perhaps the most important question is, why does so much of this trilogy sound like material that would have made no difference to the quality of With Teeth? You'd be perplexed by people calling Trent a genius on the evidence of this music, despite its risks and its willingness to experiment. Time is running out. I don't know what I'm waiting for, he sings in closing track Over and Out. Let's hope it's not a prophecy for the future of Nine Inch Nails. Verdict? 6 out of 10. So, what do you think of this discography review? Were we too harsh on the trilogy of records from 2016 to 2018? Is Broken the greatest EP of all time? Will Trent ever produce anything as life-affirming as the Downward Spiral? Should we see The Fragile as the golden egg in the Nin back catalogue? Why did With Teeth feel like a disappointment upon its release in 2005? Are we right to call Pretty Hate Machine a synth-pop album? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, and more importantly, please visit our website at www.screenblastrepeat.com for the latest album and EP reviews from established, up-and-coming and unsigned artists in the worlds of experimental, extreme metal, prog, and dark alternative.